guys are not live. Well, not live. Recording. You can start whenever you want.
All right, that's good enough.
I know, but part of the issues I run into is Janice and Jackie have a similar trait that they like to I don't like that. Not as well as be better organized and get, you know. And there's nothing wrong with it. That's a process, that's fine. But that's not we're still going to probably have to stuff. I might consider
Hello, everybody. Hello. Welcome to Do Bards Suck? Yes. I heard one yes, and you are completely wrong, because this is the year of the Bard at DragonCon.
So we will be, it's not actually live streaming right now, but it is being recorded and it will be uploaded to our tabletop DragonCon Twitch channel, which is just DragonCon Tabletop, or the Table Dragon. You can find it on Google. And please don't forget to like us on Facebook.
Also, you should probably know that at the end of this panel, we will be asking a couple of you to sing a little ditty about DragonCon. We have these wonderful tomatoes here. They're pretty smushy. I think you're going to be fine. But if your song is terrible, then the rest of the audience can throw tomatoes at you, like a true bard. So, we do want to get introductions out of the way. I'm Abby, and I'm a volunteer here at DragonCon.
I'm Tori, I'm a volunteer here as well.
Hi, and I'm Brianna Marie. I am from a podcast called Dungeons and Randomness. Thank you. We actually just dropped our first episode of Arc 3 yesterday after our live show. So, go check us out.
And one more thing, we will be throwing these out to you during the panel so that you have them ready to go for ditty time. Just so you know. So, Brianna is our expert on this one. So, if bards suck, why do they exist in the first place?
I believe that we were talking about this earlier, and bards as a concept, obviously everyone likes to be entertained.
Keep going.
And throughout history, there have been a lot of interesting historical events that have revolved around things like bards. Wow. You have an arm.
I should have played softball.
Some were actually said to have mystical powers, where if a bard said something about a fellow nobleman or a king, that could come true. Which is probably where the magical aspect came from. But there have also just been storytellers, and I think that as D&D players, storytelling is such a big part of us. And one of the things that appeals to us all about bards, especially as fantasy fans, is the idea of someone telling a story, whether it's through song or music or anything else. And I know Tolkien wrote so many songs, and that's probably the basis of how they made it into D&D in the first place after that. But I think that because we're all storytellers at the end of the day, and that's what we like to do, I think that that character type appeals to us a lot.
So in true bard fashion, I was busy throwing balls. So did you talk about the fact that they could literally like make warts on? Sorry, I wasn't listening.
I talked about a little bit about how magic things can come true. Like if
yes,
they say it, so warts is one of them, where it's like, oh, the king's going to have warts, and then the king has warts.
Yeah. So bards first came in AD&D, as I have been told, because most of us are too young to remember those. So anyway, so a lot of what we got is kind of on hearsay and the culture of it. Well, So we have the AD&D where they had to dual class. You want to talk about the dual classing?
Yeah, so in the first edition, they had to dual class as druid, fighter, and rogue?
Yeah.
Who here actually played a bard in AD&D? Did anyone here do that? How was that for you guys? Did you like it?
That wasn't even a full no. That was a
Yeah.
It was hellish.
It was hellish. Yeah, it took a lot of work to become a bard in those early editions, which, like we talked about, kind of made sense at the time because they were said to be so powerful in some historical contexts. So it kind of made sense that you had to do all of this stuff to become a bard. Whereas now in 5th edition, you just have to want to be a bard. You can start as a character that's never even sang before, never even played an instrument, but you're still learning, and that's a level 1 bard.
level 1.
Or you can just be a fantastic actor like Leroy Garvey from our game last night. But it's so much easier now, and I think that's why when we ask like, do bards suck, most people here are like, no, that's dumb. But then we got person who played in AD&D here, like, no, they kind of sucked. I know I played them in 2nd edition. And that was when they became a class for the first time. I played with them, not as one.
Yeah, it's like, and that's where the jack of all trades comes from for them. That's definitely master of none.
Yeah. That's the version. If anyone here's seen Darkness Rising, hide behind the mountain of dead bards because they're doing their best. But I think in that era of D&D, they were kind of seen as like, why are you traveling around with this? Like, you're a knight, you're a sorcerer, you're a cleric, like you all have these godly powers, and then you have this silly little boy behind you playing a lute? What is going on?
This little turd.
Yeah.
Someone must tell the stories of our conquest.
Right, exactly. And that's, I think that people still like the concept, but as far as like actually playing, sometimes they were viewed as the silly one, and they were the comic relief. We've talked about how if you were to look at popular media, there are definitely some characters that strike you as like, oh, that's the bard. You were talking about one?
I was talking about Sokka from The Last Airbender, or Avatar: Last Airbender, not The Last Airbender. That doesn't exist. But like Sokka has this comedic streak that keeps the party sort of going, and he keeps the schedule, and he keeps them going, and keeps them moving. And the episode where he has to confine like food breaks and potty breaks. Like, guys, we got a schedule. Let's go. But the other thing is he has the episode in the Swordmaster talking about how he's just the guy in the group who's ordinary. And so you have all these, like you said, these amazing fighters, these buff barbarians, these very faithful clerics, or maybe not, but generally speaking, and these very flashy wizards and sorcerers, and you just sort of have the singer, just the bard. I'm just a guy.
And then I know I played with them. Well, I didn't play with them because we ended up banning them in 3.5. And that was my problem with them there was just that they started giving them those magical powers to make them less just the ordinary guy that they've got in 5th edition. But they kind of did it wrong, so it was really complicated. So that was always my problem with them, that it was just so complicated to play a bard in 3.5. They had totally different stat tables and all that stuff.
And I think all of that comes from the game makers trying to figure out, all right, we love this concept of a bard. We love your Pippins, for instance. We love all that, but how do we fit them into this game that involves combat so heavily? Whereas in popular fiction, for the most part, if there's a bard in the party, they're kind of hanging back. Like your Tasselhoff, is he a bard? But like, he's not gonna fight. He's gonna go hide, but we don't want a player who's just going to check out during combat. So we try to give them these powers. We try to balance it in a way that makes them interesting and fun to play. But it took a really long time. I think we all kind of agree that in 5th edition, they've done a really good job. There's some stuff on our show that we've had to remove because we think they made them a little bit too much. And we'll talk about that eventually. But definitely in those early editions, I think they were just trying to figure out how to make it work, and that's why it was so complicated. And then it became like less complicated but still kind of complicated,
Yeah.
and
And I
like,
mean-
or lame, like.
You know, the second edition was, in the 80s is when that got released, and 5e was about 5 years ago, I think, right? And so we have these decades of bards just being either complicated or useless or whatever. And so, like, I know I saw a couple Critical Role shirts and everything. So if you know the start of the game, like your home game, where Sam asks, I don't know what to play, what can I be? Can I just be the worst? What's the worst? And Liam says, I don't know, you could be a gnome, you could be a gnome bard.
Scaling rocks.
And he did, because they played 5e. So do we want to talk about the, maybe any of the alignments that bards tend to be? Because I know in Dungeon Randomness you don't really use
Yeah.
alignments. We were talking about this earlier today, actually.
We had the alignment fight the other day. Did anyone come to that? Anybody? Yeah. Y'all know how I feel about alignments. So, but we were talking about, one of the things that we talked about was typically, and it was agreed upon, your wife, right? Are you married or are you just girlfriend?
No.
Girlfriend. Your girlfriend. I'm sorry. I made assumptions. You're so cute. You guys, she had brought up that
She's a bard.
that they typically are chaotic good. And I think we can all kind of agree that's usually the bard's role, right? Like,
Has anyone here ever played with an evil bard or been an evil bard? What made them evil? Let's go with Orange back here.
The willingness to lie about recent history.
ooh.
Okay, and black next to red glasses.
The bard basically used their skills at persuasion to start a cult.
Honestly, I feel like the bard would make a cult for himself or herself
Yes.
or themselves.
It was.
That makes sense. That's very bardic. So yeah.
What else? We also talked about like what a lawful bard would be.
Oh yeah, we did.
Yeah, and one of the things that came to mind, and this not technically a bard, but the court jesters. Hey. Typically, they had to toe that line so hard, historically speaking, where they had to make the kings happy and they had to keep all the noblemen happy. They were allowed to say things about royalty that no one else was allowed to say. And because of that, they were indeed like the foolish ones, but in reality, they had to be the smartest people in that room because they had to balance all these different personalities. And I think that would be a really cool angle to take a lawful good bard or even a lawful evil bard. Because if we know any evil villains typically in media, you don't want to step out of line too far because they love to kill their henchmen. So,
And we also discussed the difference between court jesters and traveling bards. Because if you're a traveling bard and you say something that the king doesn't like, you can just leave. You can get the hell out of Dodge.
not in Game of Thrones, but yeah, in
Yeah,
general.
not in Game of Thrones. Westeros is a pretty small place, in all fairness. But yeah, so I feel like your traveling bard tends to be the more often played type in most campaigns, just because you're always on the move. So why would you play a jester when you're supposed to be moving anyway?
I know I've always liked the more atypical bards because the bard that just plays the lute and sings and is charismatic and likes to try to seduce everything, to me is kind of just, it's such a trope that it's overplayed. I really like a bard that is a court jester that maybe juggles or just throws insults as their entertainment. I'd give them advantage on all of their vicious mockery rolls.
And I think 5e definitely allows a lot more for that kind of variety. I have a dwarf bard who was a fighter in like the fighting pits, and so that's her form of entertainment. And she happens to be a decent singer, but that's not her MO. Like her thing is throwing a really good looking punch.
And I remember back in high school, I couldn't get anyone to play D&D with me for a very long time. So what I would do is I would write stories. They're basically like, I'm playing every character in this group.
Yeah.
And I came up with one bard that I really liked. And I'm on a podcast, and this bard bard would not go over well there. But maybe one day, and it was a mute bard. And his whole thing was he was taken in by a group that was very boisterous and loud all the time. So what he did to kind of fit in and to find his voice was play flute and play violin by the fire. And he got so good at it, he became a bard. He also liked to break plates if people weren't paying attention to him, and he had his own version of sign language that he taught some people because it's in a world where that didn't exist. But I think there's a lot to bards, and there's so many different ways to play bards because at the end of the day, and I opened with this very like romantic way to think about it, but it's storytelling. Whether you're playing a violin or you're actually telling a physical story, there are so many ways to go about that creation process that I think there's gotta be thousands of ways to play different bards. And I think that's what draws a lot of nerds to them, and that's why we had to switch to the bigger room, because everyone was so excited to talk about bards.
I've always liked the idea of a bard that, for their vicious mockery or whatever, will just draw a really bad caricature of the enemy and just show it to them. It's just so terrible that it tanks their self-esteem and they take psychic damage.
And that's what I love. Your artistic bard is one I've never seen, and I love that idea.
We're gonna look at your notes.
That's why the other day,
Did it hurt?
No, it did not.
There you go. So be not afraid.
we were throwing the balls back during the alignment fight, and Jason started just throwing them at the ground because he was terrified of hitting someone in the face. Or like he was sick of hitting people in the face. But yeah, I think there's so many ways to use storytelling in role play too, and that's my bread and butter. I love most of my bardic knowledge comes from role play because I haven't played bards personally myself, but there's so many options for them.
Still love that joke.
Thank you. There's so many options for them. There's one historical fact from like Japanese history that I loved, and I always thought this was a great idea for a bard.
She is just a fountain of knowledge. I'm mesmerized.
You know, I was such a wee most of my life. So what warlords would sometimes do, or really prominent samurai, is they would disguise themselves and cover themselves in mud and bring an instrument of some sort into a town, and they would just tell these really dark, terrifying stories of this warlord who has just been town to town destroying everything. And then they would leave, and they would wash their face, and come in their regalia, and the town would just surrender because they just heard all these horrifying stories. So
That would be an evil bard.
that would be an evil bard, or just a really clever bard if you don't use alignments. But yeah, things like that. Storytelling is so powerful, and again, a lot of bardic stuff comes from Tolkien and that making a story. It was said earlier, like someone has to tell the tale.
Yes, exactly.
That kind of thing. So I think they're so multifaceted.
And I also think with roleplay, and again, I was throwing balls, so you may have already said this. But the whole idea that, the people who tend to play bards are people who like to be a little more out there. They like to roleplay. They like to sort of make this scene happen. And, they aren't, they've chosen a bard, so they're not combat heavy. That's not what they're really into, generally speaking. Now, there are murder hobo bards. They do exist.
But the cutest bard on our show, or had currently, you gotta listen to the next episode. But he, every time the fight would start, it's like, I go invisible. That would it. I go invisible every single time. He's adorable. He's this little halfling. He's the cutest thing in the world. But
I just imagine this little teeny tiny thing in bright colors and sparkles just popping in and out.
And again, like you said, one of our best role players, because that's the class he went towards.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a little kid, and this was 2nd edition. So this was the Jack of all trades, Master of None bard. my father and his friends are all musicians. So what they would do, and it's like, okay, time for pizza. If you come back with a fully created song when we start up again, you get bonus on this boss fight we're about to do. And they would do it. They'd sit down and like write out a song, pick the chords, and sing it when we got back to the table. I always thought that was magical when I was a little kid.
Yeah. And one of the things I also really like about the role play aspect of Bards too is, you know, I've known several of my friends that play Bards, and their key thing that they do every single game with every single character is flirt. Because of course they do. And it really sort of draws you in because you have to respond in some way. You can't just be like, oh, okay, and just move on.
Yeah.
You could, but then you have to be consistent with that character aspect of that. And I think
Half-breeds
that
came from somewhere.
Half-breeds.
Every half-breed came from somewhere.
and it's usually the bard. I actually, whenever we were first asked to do this panel, I did make the joke where it's like, oh, do bards suck? Well, it depends on who you ask, the DM, the player, or the tavern wench. But yeah, on that topic, all of us have done a little bit of DMing, so we've talked a lot about it from the player standpoint. Let's talk about the DM standpoint. Do bards suck, DM?
Like I said, in my 3.5 games, I banned bards, and I've had one game that we played with a bard, and he wasn't an overly outgoing guy, so it wasn't too bad. But I know I definitely made him be more outgoing because he'd roll high persuasion checks, and I'd have to be like, okay, well, what do you say? You got to say something. So that's where I think bards definitely aren't necessarily for beginners either, because you have to be able to play up that role play aspect. But from the DM standpoint, those high persuasion checks killed me. They got half price on everything. I'd have this great combat set up and they'd talk their way out of it, and I'd just be like, well, there's 2 hours of planning that I didn't have to do.
Right. For Dungeons and Randomness, Jason is our DM, and I'm a player. But I'm like, we've never called it co-DMing. I'm just there to help with semantics and like help with scheduling. But one of the things I also help with is when we switched over to 5th edition. So we started in 4th edition. We went through every single spell, every single racial trait, all of that. And one of the things we really don't like in D&D, and bards have so much of this, bards and artificers are the worst, mind control. Now, if this were a debate, I'm sure I'd get things thrown at me soon. And now that I've said that, someone's gonna throw something at me. Thank you. But our question, whenever we would decide whether or not a spell was allowed or not, or whether it needed to be tweaked somewhat, is that if it contributed to roleplay in some way, then fine. But if it's negating roleplay, if it's taking a challenge and making it not matter anymore, that's when we remove the spell. Like, there was definitely one ritual back in, this was 4th edition, where it's just like, summon a bridge. Now you have a bridge. And it's like, oh, that's the whole point of that one encounter, was to figure out how to make a bridge. And now there's just this ritual that makes one. I think mind control is kind of the same way, where it's like, okay, if you need to go convince a king to do something he wouldn't do, mind control makes that a little bit too easy. It makes it so that the players don't have to diplomatize or like figure out what the king wants from them. They just get to control his mind for a few minutes, and yeah, in 20 minutes he'll forget that happened, or he'll remember that it was magic or something like that. But then why does that spell matter? So like, definitely from a DM's perspective, I think that in that way bards could be tweaked a little bit more for balance.
Yeah, definitely, just to keep that, oh, we captured this minion, and now we're gonna interrogate him. I'm just gonna cast Charmed on him, and he's my friend. Here's the plot. Like, then they don't have to work for it at all.
Anyone listen to The Adventure Zone and remember Clark? Yeah, that. I love being behind the DM screen, because in situations like you were talking about mind control, I can lie. I can fail that save for the king and just be like, he passes.
See, Jason makes all of his roles public.
No, well, that's his fault.
And I think that's the thing where, like, is like the player DM contract kind of thing,
Mhm.
where it's like, if it's for the good of the game, I think that's why the DM screen exists in the
Right.
first place. But I think with our game, we just want to keep everything pretty like on the table. Jason makes all of his rolls public for the most. Sometimes he won't tell you why he's rolling, and that's the worst.
Beware the mystery.
What does
roll.
that mean? But that's why we just straight up go through all the spells and say which ones aren't gonna work in Therius. There is a low magic world, and if we just say like, okay, mind control doesn't work that way. Bards, for the most part, like they'll get. I think in 5th edition, Charmed now gives you advantage on persuasion rolls, which I think is much more fair than straight out mind control. Because if you sing someone a beautiful song that endears them to you, sure, get that advantage. But that doesn't mean that you own their brain. Like, that's not how that works. You're not Ember. Anyone Danny Phantom? No.
Oh, there we go.
You will remember.
But yeah, and like, you know, like I said with the DM screen, like, you know, it lets me lie. I actually really do like Bards from a DM perspective, and I do kind of like it when they jack up my combat encounters, because then it puts me on my toes, and I really have to prove myself as a DM. So,
Right.
like, I get really into that kind of stuff, and I really don't like a lot of combat encounters. It is not my cup of tea. If I'm playing, I get bored out of my mind. And as a DM, I'm a little bit more engaged, but even still, I'm like, I can see them getting bored, and I'm like, we need to get out of this quick. So, I definitely do like when a bard will sort of be like, I see that you're trying to get me to fight this thing, and I don't want to, so I'm not gonna. And my sister has a really good character. I don't think it's actually a bard, but it might as well be, because the moment her boyfriend got annoyed, her boyfriend's the DM, he got annoyed with the party and threatened to throw a kraken at them. Her first instinct was, I'm gonna make friends with the kraken. So I would negate that. Forget that encounter. You're gonna have a kraken as an ally. No combat's ever gonna work for you again, GM. Careful what you throw. And with that.
So do we all call people up for like bardic stories?
Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah, let's do that.
We'll half an
So
hour.
who has some really cool bard stories? We're gonna have the mic right here. So just line up and we'll start telling stories. If you are planning on singing, I suggest you use this time to plan your song. But also keep an eye out, because I will still be throwing things.
I actually play 13 Days with a group of kids, and I like it. It has its roots in 3.5s, but it's, the mechanics are easier, so the kids have a easier time getting into the role play aspect. And I strongly recommend any adult playing with a party of kids. So my husband is a GM, and I'm the bard, and I strongly recommend using the bard because you can kind of guide the story while letting back let the kids do the heavy lifting of combat. And you can support them and entertain them and kind of guide them along the right answer to the puzzle.
Yeah.
And so as an adult playing with kids, I think it's a great tool to use to get them engaged in the experience.
Yeah, I definitely like that because bards are just such good support as well that they can do everything. So the kids can be whatever they want. They don't have to worry about being a well-rounded party because the bard's there to pick the locks and check for traps and persuade people if all the kids want to be barbarians.
So on the note of evil bards, one campaign I'm currently in, our basically my boss for this little excursion we're on was this bard, and he's got this concert going on that's been going on for like years, basically. Yeah, I know. And he just explains. So we go up to him, we talk to him, and go, hey, can we get this thing, this object we need from you, so we can go and tell, like, this person who rules this entire continent not to do this thing and he wants to hunt down humans? Maybe, hopefully, thank you. And he goes, well, you do this thing for me. Take this contract, written in Infernal, to this one band that doesn't actually have a contract with me. And we go, well, what's the state party member who says Infernal, reads Infernal, and goes, wow, this is terrible. And we go, we're just gonna kill him. And it was a fun fight because he had like 2 barbarians and we're all hit and played.
So he was more of an agent.
Yeah, he wasn't exactly a warlock, he did make warlocks, so. So, evil bards, very fun.
Nice. I was really proud of that actually.
Great job. That's gonna be distracting. Alright, so
I won't hit you, I promise.
No, you're good. So I this year played in the campaign I was playing this year, and other GMs left to go off to college, but I played a very slutty tiefling bard. So their name was Drew Schmidt, and basically part of it was they were stuck on this island full of vampires. So Drew, of course, is at this like the one camp that's not vampires, and there's this very like grumpy angel in the camp, right? So, of course, Drew starts off by, like, failing a bunch of persuasion checks and making this angel hate them completely. And then I'm going to spare you all the details in between, but by the end of the campaign, Drew proposed to the angel while Careless Whisper played. And they had a dragonborn daughter. And it was very funny.
I'm so sorry.
Told you, nice.
It was very wonderful because Drew, the rings, because they didn't have any ring shops on the side, and Drew had like finally had this tiefling to love, like have this, angel to love them. The ring was created by the dragonborn daughter who didn't know anything about it, and the ring was shaped like her head. So, be careful of tieflings like Drew.
We were talking a little bit about like lawful bards, and he wasn't exactly lawful because like he had a rogue boyfriend who was totally like steal things, and so he was like, okay, maybe I'll let my morals go a little bit. But I did play a bard for a while who was very morally opposed to charming anybody because he was like, oh my god, that's so rude. You can't like be mean to people and like take over their minds. So I'm just gonna be really persuasive and convince you that you should follow me anyway. And he almost got eaten by pterodactyls, but managed to survive. He was a little one. There were like 4 of them.
Pterodactyls. He was like, hey, I'm gonna persuade you not to eat me.
He was also a merfolk, which was super fun.
Aww.
So I was drawn to the panel here about do bards suck. I actually really love bards. I like to play bards. But maybe my answer to the question is, when do bards suck? And my son probably loves D&D because of one experience that we had, because he loves to see his mother suffer. So I was actually not the bard in this scenario. We were introducing some young kids to Dungeons and Dragons, and we were all first level characters. I had played 2E, so it was a long time before I came back to it. And so we had adults and kids who had never played, a DM of course we had, and then me. And I was playing a ranger. A first level ranger, not so very powerful, but we went into a cave where there was a path that we probably were supposed to take, and then there was what looked like maybe a cutout hole with a garbage, where they threw garbage out, and so you could potentially climb up to the hole and see what was happening. So my ranger rolled exceptionally well for first level to be able to make it, got halfway up. We went around the circle and the bard was like, I don't know what to do. And this was a man, not one of the kids, and so he's like, so I pull out my lute, and everybody was like, what?
No.
And
You ran up, hid behind a rock.
yeah, so I climbed the fence, so here he is pulling on his lute, figuring out what he's doing. I make a second check, and actually make it to the top. Unbelievable, my DM was like, well, you didn't really roll it. I did. Made it up to the top, hid behind a rock, had a perfect view, and I was totally going to ruin what the DM was planning to do because of these crazy checks. And the bard started playing. My name was Nasa. Nasa the climber, Nasa the climber. And everyone in the room turned, saw me, and the battle began. But that's when bards suck.
So, are you going to sing for us later?
Am I going to sing? My son knows the rest of the words to Nasa. I know the rest of the song.
Okay,
playing Pathfinder when I was in the Moon Lords, but doing assault. So I was a bard gunslinger. I was also a female pygmy or a conqueror, so I was a halfling owl.
I'm very interested in this story now.
And we had to go to a little junkyard that's full of goblins. I managed to befriend one of the goblins, which became more or less in love with me, wanting to have flying owl babies with me.
It wasn't just that all half-breeds come from somewhere.
This happened later, but also ended up with a female black dragon trying to seduce me.
Oh. It's like the opposite of most bard stories.
I know.
Sounds like Shrek, actually.
So I ended up taking, instead of having to deal with goblins, I ended up having a goblin army behind me and a female black dragon on my side. Now, I wasn't even trying, but
I think that would convince the king no advantage required.
I know. This goblin, the black dragon also turned into I didn't know it was the black dragon until after that part of the game, but turned into a rat folk, and I didn't realize it, and was trying to sleep with me too, at the same time. So thankfully I said that I kind of was loyal to the dragon. Otherwise, I think she would have killed me. But yeah, I ended up with a goblin army that wanted to have flying goblin babies. And a black dragon that gave me a
soul of a bard.
and as a gift, the black dragon gave me the ability to speak to animals. So I had a dog too that was just like talking to me nonstop.
Did it try to sleep with you?
No, the dog was very protective though. And he died once, but he came back.
What a roller coaster.
That was from start to finish.
So we were playing Tomb of Annihilation, and I was playing a bard named Kevin. He was very much a Kevin, which was like great. It was great to introduce like our party to new people because it's like everybody else chose names like straight from the source book, and then there was Kevin. And
I'm just a guy. I'm just here.
Right. It's just kind of like hello. So we get like we're like significantly into the thing. I'm not sure if this counts as too much of a spoiler at all, but like Kevin ends up getting an item that basically raises his hit points from like I don't know, something like normal for level 12 to like 120, like it becomes insane. Which meant but the downside to this was he could no longer make decisions for what the party was going to do. So in like one session flat, our like the little half-elf bard became the party tank. And so what the rest of the party unanimously decided to do was, as we were exploring the tomb, whenever we weren't sure if a situation was going to be dangerous or not, they'd be like, well, go on. And Kevin's like, but this resulted in Kevin being trapped in a cage, holding a giant handful of crabs that kept pinching him, as an aboleth slowly circled around this cage. And everybody's trying to figure out how to get out of this, and Kevin's like,
I'm trying to figure out how you got into this.
Kevin couldn't make decisions for the party, and everybody's like, well, I mean, if one of us is expendable.
That would be fun.
Love you, Kevin.
Okay, so this is a story about our bard killed my monk out of combat. Okay, so our bard named Jacob, he fell in love with my PC character, monk. So after a few romantic days, they passionately hug. And he rolled a performance check with 40. So my monk loses consciousness, right? Instead of leaving her alone like a good person, he cast dream to screw her in her dream. And another performance check, 45. And her soul began to ascend into astral plane. What does he do? Flame shift. Another performance check. And I I'm not lying when I say this, but he wrote a performance check of 51. Okay? And at that point, her soul went to heaven.
What a way to
Afterwards,
go.
he did resurrect her, but this was my first PC death. Thank you.
Add it all, number lucky.
My first character in D&D was a bard, but it wasn't a normal bard. Instead, he was a half-orc bard with a North Star and was very combat heavy. That was the exact opposite of what bard normally is. He was averagely tanky, and he didn't really do much bard stuff more than he kind of used the magic there throughout campaign. But I do remember this one portion where he just, well, I believe he just kept casting vicious mockery over and over again, just from afar. It's like, you suck. Your father was an elderberry and your mother was a pigeon pecker. And eventually, we managed to down it. But then, of course, when the interrogated it immediately committed suicide. So that, and I tried to stop him, but of course, as my brilliant hard move, I tried to stop him with strength and not charisma. And he ended up killing himself.
Oh no.
So, I happen to like bards. I don't like playing them, but I think my character, barbarian, strictly because I like to use people about what my character does. So I like bards in the aspect that they are really great at preventing combat encounters with a high enough roll. For example, in one of my more recent games I played with my friends, our bard understood that there was a Nothic and a Minotaur who was wearing a lot of armor in one room, and then there was like 6 other Minotaurs in another room. And so he decided, can I charm a Minotaur? And so he decided to figure out what languages the Nothic and the Minotaur spoke, and since the Nothic was able to speak a language the Minotaur couldn't, he used tongues on himself, started talking to the Nothic to get the Nothic to speak in another language that the Minotaur couldn't understand. And then he switches back to the Minotaur's language and say, how dare you mock our glorious leader? And that was his attempt to actually charm the Minotaur. And then the Minotaur failed his insight. And that's how we turned a potential boss fight against him versus all of his minions. And then we only got out by having to kill one thing. It was great. Love parts of that.
I bet that was one of those moments the GM was like, dang it, I should have done that.
He wasn't happy.
So one of the things that I like about bards are doing non-traditional styles of bards, like the warrior poet. Like not the person who's going to sing, but looking for words of power, those stories that will, incite an entire region.
Are you thinking like Homer's Odyssey?
Yeah,
Okay.
things like that, and I think that those would be really entertaining. But also a controversial opinion that I have is that with magical secrets, bards are more powerful than wizards.
Hell yeah.
Yes.
Just saying.
I would definitely not disagree with that.
So me and a couple of friends, we decided to get together and play D&D. It was, I think it was my second time in 5th edition, and we had already created my classes. And I was a paladin dwarf named No Freak Jadehead, and for the story to continue on for the beginning of it, someone had to be a bard. And so the D&D said, who do you want to be the bard? Everyone pointed to me. And so then I had to turn my dwarf into a bard. And of course I had high strength, high dexterity, and no charisma. or intelligence. And so here we are, where we are going down this dark cave, there's purple liquid everywhere, it's acid, and there are 3 obelisks and they're standing there. And they're like, well, are you going to do something? So I try to go there and I sing a song. But one of my downsides is as we went through the campaign, I picked up an item. And it was an item that if I got money, I had to go for it. And of course, this obelisk was covered in diamonds. And it said on the obelisk, right below, and a statue said, say these words and you will get paid in glory. Of course I do it, and it summons literally any kind of boss you can think of and distorts the world, and I ended the campaign right then.
So I was the one who said that Bards sucked when you first started.
Oh, you.
Yeah. This
I don't
is
have any
actually,
more balls left to throw at you.
This is second edition. So. Anybody who's never played 2E won't really get where I'm coming from. But for the longest time, I wanted to do a ranger bard because I figured like I could multi-class a ranger bard, and that's pretty much everything. Like you get the rangers get the thief abilities pretty much that the bards don't get. But it's really hard to meet all the minimum ability requirements for both a ranger and a bard because there's like high minimums for several different stats. I finally did it. I finally hit the abilities to start the character, and it sucked. I mean, I ended up basically being a ranger that had to split XP because the bard part of it just didn't really play into it at all. The only really fun thing about the character was trying to seduce all of my DM's NPCs and making him really uncomfortable and having to like roleplay that with me. But yeah, I mean, the second edition bard, that's where I'm coming from. The second edition bard really doesn't have anything going for it you can't do much better with another character or even multi-classing characters.
I feel like second edition of Bard is a lot like all the evolutions where it's like, oh, they're so pretty. There's a better fire type. There's
Right,
a better
exactly,
water type.
yeah.
There's a,
I am bummed that Bard Ranger mix didn't work out though. So
Yeah,
that's a really interesting concept.
That's what I thought too.
He
It
went
really
all
seemed
about
like
that forever.
Shut up about that.
Finally got it. He was like,
Yeah, it was very disappointing.
Well, have you shut up about it now?
He's still going.
Nah, I just gave a speech about it.
As a DM, Bards suck. If I have to deal with Tasha's hideous laughter, I'm going to hit somebody.
That isn't in our game.
Well, but as a player, I immensely enjoy Bards, right? In particular, the time I'm thinking of is watching my friend. Our DM had decided that he was going to run 2 games concurrently with 2 different parties in the same universe, one acting good and one acting evil. So the Bard and I were on the evil party. And we were walking through the woods and we find this caravan of like pilgrims, I guess, going somewhere. I don't really know where they're going, nor did we care. And we decided to rob them. And the Bard, instead of, he stopped us before we could draw our weapons and said, hold on, I want to try something. He walked up and he rolled a natural 20 on persuasion and said, would you like the vacation of a lifetime? We are willing to send you on an all expenses paid cruise on a wonderful cruise ship if you just abandon all of your stuff and go in that direction, pointing in a random direction. And then they left, but we didn't convince the kids to leave, so we had to take care of the kids after.
I do love when Bards say, hang on, I want to try something.
See, as a DM, I hate when Bards say, hang on, I want to try something.
Alright, I'm one of the few here that raised their hands when you said first edition Bard, so I know the hell of that. So,
good job.
but this actually has to do with more of a 4th ed character of mine who was not a Bard, he was a swords mage. We played a very long campaign all the way up to level 20. We had 7 different encounters with dragons. We didn't fight a single one. The sword sage, the guy with the lowest charisma in the group, which was me, made all the persuasion rolls and talked our way out of every single fight.
So it was a case of, I probably should have played a bard.
Will you bless my dice?
I wish I could, but if you ask my current groups, they tell you, no, don't have him do that, he's going low.
Hello. Two quick ones. One, if you're a DM and you're frustrated with bard shenanigans from the party, you can unleash your bard against them, and then have you call it to Lord Bar, uninspire them as a reaction when they think they hit.
Thank you.
It's fun. I did that to my party because I know they hate furries, so female Tabaxi bar that upcasted fireball, they were so angry after they killed her, they skinned her, and one of the players now has her to cloak. Sorry, what? Perfect. That's what I'm going to tell them, yes.
He also named his character Bear Hugger. I don't know why.
And also something else, as far as I can tell, best example I can think of an evil bard. Who else has watched the movie Pink Floyd's The Wall?
Yes.
Okay, I really can't think of a better example of an evil bard than someone who has a rock concert and then inspires the crowd to basically do Crystal Knot. So, yeah.
I wonder, as far as evil bards go, Wormtongue count?
Yes.
He certainly used his voice a lot to do things. So I guess, yeah, there's an evil bard.
Donald Trump is
He's just a
evil
lame
bard.
bard. It's really bad. Not touching it.
Okay, so I basically wanted to make kind of a strange character, so I made a kobold bard. So a little edgy kid, basically. So we were in this castle, and we went up a level too far. And I think we were supposed to do it in the night, as my DM told us. But we did it wrong, and then we got caught by this vampire lady. So that was great. And she was taking us to see someone higher up in the castle, who we did not want to mess with. But we knew that we'd have to fight her anyways. So we were kind of following this vampire lady, and everyone in my group was like, seduce her, seduce her. And I was like, me, being the confident little kid I was, looked on the internet and found the worst pickup lines that I possibly could find. And I used as many as I could before she was like, okay, if you don't stop talking, I will rip your throat out.
Are you from Tennessee? Because you're the only 10 I see.
Depending on what fantasy world they were in, that wouldn't even make sense. I know. It would make it so much better. What the heck is Tennessee?
Oh, I absolutely have a place in my homebrew world after Salina, Tennessee. 1010.
This is a story for anyone that is a chaotic alignment in their real life. That's what I like to hear. It also will teach you how to shift your DM into hard mode. Because they will try and murder you throughout the entire game as quickly as they possibly can. So, I've played D&D a long time, way back early versions, D&D 2.7. And like any great D&D'er, we made our characters while we were eating. I didn't like made your character, you probably did it quick. I looked down at the plate. I decided I was going to be a halfway bard. Well, that would be cool. I'd be like tiny and musical. I'd be like Miley Cyrus. And I thought, I looked down at the plate. I saw a roast pork and I saw a bread roll. And I'm like, you know what? She's gonna be tiny. She's gonna be cute. I'm gonna call her Roll. So her name is Roll. And this is where it got fun. So, throughout the entire game, anytime anyone else's turn was going on, and the DM would say, alright, go ahead and roll up. I would go, what? You're talking to me, right? You said roll. Why are you saying my name? And I'd be like, oh, okay, it's fine, never mind, I get what you did. And she'd go, okay, roll up. And I'd be like, what? Can I help you? Why are you interrupting me? And I just did it forever. And it was the goal of the game to murder me off as quickly as possible. We ran for 2 months. I encourage you all to try it.
Alright, this will be our last story, so singers, get ready.
I can certainly never follow that up with what I'm about to say. So first of all, what an amazing story. My bard, I didn't really know about
about the stereotype that bards are supposed to deduce everything, so, and we didn't have a healer. So my DM gave me a flute that healed people around me, and I became party mom. And so I made sure that everyone stayed alive, and made sure that the kids all went to bed on time, and I used my charisma checks to make sure that everyone ate breakfast, and that was my experience with the bard.
I like that kind of bard. I'm okay with that kind of bard.
Alright, so if you have a song, please raise your hand. I see four too.
I see four singers.
So what I was gonna do is have each of us pick one, but since we have four, let's just go ahead and have all of them. I think we have time. Yeah, come on up.
Do we want to put them on the stage?
It is up to them. They can go to the microphone, they can go to the stage. If they're on the stage, it means that the balls will probably hit us too, which we probably deserve.
No. I was gonna be like, I'll hold it. Oh, perfect. I'll take that back actually. There we go. Better mic.
So I actually don't sing or play, but this will be quick. So.
Get ready, throwers.
The best place I have ever gone, the best time I have ever seen, would of course be Dragon Con 2019.
I am the great necrobard. I raise the dead with my song. They come up to shake. Oh, I don't want to do this. Their bones and dance along. Ghouls and zombies alike, ghosts and skeletons, all dance in the night and listen to the drums. Now the moon disappears behind a dark storm cloud. Light shines, electrifies the undead crowd. I am the great necrobard. I raise the dead with my song. They come up to shake their bones and dance along.
Mine's a sing-along. You'll get the chorus pretty quick, guys. Dragon Con, what are they doing to you? Dragon Con, it's not your fault. The lines are long, the sky bridge is closed, and the people are dressed like carpet. Dragon Con, what are they doing to you? Dragon Con, it's not your fault. I'm hot and thirsty and still pretty drunk. I wanted a panel, but it was too far to walk. Dragon Con, what are they doing to you? Dragon Con, it's not your fault. I wanted to be hit by balls. Come on. Yeah. Which, you know what? In retrospect, no one hears me. Just throw your balls up. Congratulations, Cat. Yeah.
Of course, this is a bar panel. There's so many balls in the air.
I love watching them catch the light.